Chapter 34, Finals. Ali stood up, stretching. It was the last day of the tournament, and she was a little nervous about her match against Orphea. Aaron had gotten a little more information about her, learning that she had completely crushed her opposition with her aura, easily defeating human and faunus alike. Other than that, there wasn't any information, and searches for her turned up nothing about her past. It seemed that she was also one of the newer contestants. They had eaten a quick breakfast at a nearby cafe. Although Alice was nervous, she was also quite hungry, having spent a lot of her energy the previous day. Weiss finished up her omelet and also got up, walking with Alice to the exit, where Aaron waited for them. The three walked down the streets, the weather now quite chilly. A few minutes later, they reached the gym. People had already began arriving, some walking and others being dropped off. Most of the fighters had already been eliminated, but they still came to watch the final rounds. Alice felt a little queasy when she walked into the gym and saw the huge amount of spectators. All but one of the cages had been taken down, each final match being held individually. Bleachers had been fully stretched out, and the empty spaces were filled with folding chairs, giving the crowd ample space to sit and spectate the match. A large screen was set up on one of the walls, displaying the upcoming matches and portraits of the fighters. The gym was growing noisy, people buzzing excitedly as they waited for the matches to begin. The final fights were to go in order by weight division, from the heaviest to the lightest. Alice's round was last, so she still had a few hours until her way in. She sat down with Aaron and Weiss, trying to calm down and focus. "Take a good look," Aaron said, pointing to the screen on the wall. "You might be up against some of those people at the professional tournament. Watch how they fight and note down anyone who seems strong." Alice nodded, not recognizing any of the portraits on the screen. Her own face was paired with Orphea's, and she finally got her first good look at her opponent's face. Orphea had light black hair and large amethyst eyes, the picture showing her lips slightly curved in a confident smile. After seeing her appearance, Alice could understand why so many people in the crowd were holding up signs cheering for Orphea or asking for her hand in marriage. The video screen played highlights of the previous day as the first round of fighters prepared themselves. The replays didn't reveal much, as they mostly just showed the moment of victory or the final attack, but Alice did see how Orphea just used brute strength to knock her opponents out, not bothering to use any moves or techniques but instead just punching them and aiming for their joints until they were too bruised to continue blocking. Half an hour later, the first round began. The heavyweight class consisted of two hulking contestants, one a bull faunus and the other human. The noise level rose as Bull walked into the gym and towards the cage, getting into position. The human walked in after him, looking calm as he mentally prepared himself. Once both of them were in the cage, the referee gave the signal to begin. Both of them flared their auras, immediately charging at each other, swinging. The human slammed a knee into the bull fauna's middle, but the bull ignored it, continuing his charge and cinching the human. They collided into the metal wall of the cage, and the bull faunus started smashing a fist into the human's head, each blow making the human's aura fade. He struggled weakly under the barrage, trying to throw a few hits back, but they were weak and ineffective and his legs eventually gave out, collapsing to the floor. The bull didn't stop, immediately dropping down and continuing to punch the human's head. The crowd roared, some of them cheering while others shouted for the human to get up. The referee was about to stop them when the human suddenly dodged one of the punches, the bull's fist slamming into the floor with a thudding concussion as the human swung his head to the side. With a quick motion, he drew his legs back up to his chest, under the bull, and kicked out, sending the bull stumbling back as he flipped himself upright. The two started circling each other, wary. The human pivoted and swung out with a roundhouse kick, but the bull raised an arm and blocked the kick, then slid his arm under the human's leg and grabbed it. The human was pulled off balance, hopping forward in a desperate attempt to avoid falling over, but he bull pushed forward and shoved the human down, putting him in a leg lock and hyperextending his knee. The human tried to resist, trying to sit himself back up, but he eventually tapped out, wanting to end it before his knee was permanently damaged. The judge pulled the bull off and the human retracted his leg, hissing in pain as he cradled it. Applause rang out from the crowd as the bull pranced around the cage, bellowing in victory as the human was helped out of the arena, limping. The next match was the light heavyweight division, two faunus battling it out. The match lasted 5 rounds, neither of the contestants willing to give up as their faces accumulated cuts and bruises, blood splattering onto the floor. At the end of the match, the winner was decided by the panel of judges, the result a draw. Alice watched in fascination as the matches progressed. The lightweight class was especially notable, a monkey faunus landing a flying kick on a human by pushing off of the cage for extra momentum, then spinning and smashing an elbow into the human's temple, dropping him. The featherweight classes were in progress when a judge tapped her on the shoulder, telling her to go change and do the final weigh-in. Good luck, Weiss and Aaron said simultaneously. They think you can't win, Aaron added. No matter how much humans pretend they think differently, they want to see a little human girl take down a stronger, faster faunus. Alice wondered where he was going with this. Don't let the crowd affect you. Give this match all you've got and prove them wrong, he declared, staring into her eyes with a fiery expression. Alice gave him a little smile and nodded, heading to the locker room. The cheering of the crowd penetrated the walls as Alice changed, her hands trembling a little from nerves and excitement. After the weigh-in, she sat in one of the waiting areas, listening for the announcement that would be the signal for her to walk in. The announcer called out her name and Alice stood up, taking a deep breath as she left the waiting area and walked into the gym, camera flashes momentarily blinding her as she walked through the door. She briefly wondered if any of her co-workers would see her fight, but banished that thought and all others as she entered the cage and took up her position at one end, trying to ignore the loud audience. Orphea's name was announced, and she walked in, her amethyst eyes bright and a confident grin on her face. She was the same height as Alice, with a slim profile and wiry muscles, her light black hair in a short ponytail, her small chest perfectly suiting her overall image. The crowd roared upon seeing her, Orphea clearly being a fan favorite after her performance the day before. She raised a hand in acknowledgement, turning to the crowd on both sides and smiling. The cheers grew louder, and Alice heard someone scream, "Marry me," over the din of noise. The human girl's lips twitched a little as she heard the words, trying not to laugh as she stepped into the cage. They were positioned at opposite ends, their guards up and waiting for the referee to give his signal. The moment the round started, Alice immediately went all out, flaring her aura and taking a step forward, then rotating her torso and gathering momentum, fist swinging toward the human as she put all of her force behind that one punch. Alice caught a glimpse of Orphea's eyes widening before her fist slipped through the human girl's guard and slammed into her midsection, blowing her backward. Her body slammed into the metal wall of the cage with a loud rattle, her back to the metal fencing as she hit the floor and slumped over. The crowd suddenly went silent, shocked by what had just happened. The referee began to walk toward Orphea, checking to see if she was conscious. Orphea suddenly raised an arm, palm out, signaling to the referee that she was fine. The crowd renewed their cheering as Orphea raised her head and looked up at Alice, amethyst eyes glowing. There was a vibration in the air as Orphea's aura flared into existence around her, her body now shrouded in a steel gray tinted with bright purple. In a blur, Orphea was on Alice, slamming blow after blow into her, alternating with jabs and leg kicks. Alice could do nothing but defend herself, her aura being depleted as Orphea punched her over and over again, forcing Alice back into the wall of the cage. Their auras collided as Orphea kneed Alice in the stomach, the metal fencing behind Alice creaking as the force lifted her feet off the ground and hurled her into the sides of the cage. Orphea continued this for a while, each blow lifting Alice off her feet and bouncing her off of the wall behind her. Suddenly stopping, Orphea took a few steps back, taking advantage of Alice's disorientation from the blows. With a running leap, Orphea twisted in midair and slammed a flying kick into Alice's upraised arms, feeling a crack as her forearms fractured. The wall's hinges couldn't take the abuse any longer. With a scream of tearing metal, the wall behind Alice collapsed, the kick sending her flying out of the cage. The audience cried out as Alice was blown back into the crowd, people scrambling out of their chairs as Alice smashed into the ground, the metal fencing clattering away from her. Head spinning, Alice tried to stand up, her legs wobbly. The referee looked shocked and more than a little confused as Orphea turned and began to walk away, believing she had won. The crowd let out a gasp, and Orphea spun around, surprised to see Alice standing back up, her aura encircling her arms as she healed the broken bones. "I'm not going down that easily," Alice muttered, flaring her aura again as she walked back into the cage. They ran at each other again, one of the cage walls missing, the referee deciding to let it play out. This time, Alice traded blows, focusing less on defense and more on offense as they punched, kicked, and elbowed each other. The tide turned against Alice once again as her aura started flickering, running out. Orphea's aura was still glowing strongly, Orphea still having a lot more in reserve than Alice. Then, with a palm strike to the head, Alice's aura cracked and fizzled out. She stumbled backwards, dazed, as Orphea raised her leg and landed a frontal kick in Alice's abdomen, sending her skidding across the floor and tumbling into one of the remaining metal walls. Alice tried to stand up again, her muscles spasming as she gasped for breath, her vision going fuzzy. Letting out a resigned sigh, her legs failed her as she collapsed back onto the ground, exhausted. She stared at the ceiling, blinking the sweat out of her eyes as she listened to the referee declare Orphea the winner, the crowd going wild. And then two purple eyes stared down at her as Orphea extended a hand, pulling Alice up. "Thanks," Alice said, stumbling a bit, her legs still unable to support her. Orphea shifted Alice onto her shoulder, bearing her weight. "That was a good fight, Allison," she said, grinning. "It's been a while since I've had a good match with someone of my age." "You completely crushed me," Alice admitted as they walked down the steps and toward the locker rooms. The crowd was cheering, camera flashes leaving behind starbursts in Alice's eyes. "You can call me Alice. Don't you have an award or something to pick up now?" Orphea shook her head as she opened the door to the locker rooms, guiding Alice in. "The award ceremony takes place after our fight, in about 30 minutes. They changed together, wiping off their sweat with towels and putting on track pants and t-shirts. As they sat there for a while, talking, Alice learned that this was also Orphea's first tournament. "I'm not actually supposed to be here," Orphea admitted. "I come from a family of musicians, and my parents completely disapprove of this." Alice was startled. "What?" "I started doing martial arts as a recreational activity," Orphea explained, "and my parents didn't really mind, thinking that it was just a harmless sport. When my aura suddenly activated, I started focusing more on martial arts. My parents wouldn't accept that, so now I'm here to win something and prove to them that I'm actually good at this." Orphea let out a sigh, staring at the ceiling, clearly relieved to have someone to talk to and confess to. "Well, I work as a nurse," Alice said, smiling. "I'm also here to prove something to myself." Orphea nodded. "I recognized you after I saw you heal your arms," she said. "Sorry about that, by the way." Alice held out her arms, twisting them around and demonstrating how they weren't broken anymore. "Don't worry, they're as good as new." "Hey, do you want to see something cool?" Orphea suddenly asked. "Ah, sure," Alice said. Orphea held up the edge of her jacket with her hands, stretching the thin fabric between her fingers. She softly sang one pure, clear note and the fabric instantly split, a perfectly straight cut appearing and the cloth parting. "My semblance," Orphea stated. Alice stared. "And I thought healing was cool," Alice said, awestruck. "Well, it's more useful than my semblance in most cases," Orphea said modestly. "You could be a surgeon," Alice suggested. "Perfect incisions every time." Orphea shook her head with a smile and changed the topic. They talked for a little longer before Orphea looked up, checking the clock. "We should start heading back," Orphea said, standing up. "The award ceremony is soon, and I'm sure you have people waiting for you." "Come with me," Alice offered. "I'll introduce you to my friends." They exited the locker room together, heading back into the crowd to wait a bit with Aaron and Weiss. People made way for the two, standing back at a safe distance while begging them for autographs at the same time. They both signed a few before finally reaching the two, sitting down with them and ignoring the people around them. Weiss immediately hugged Alice upon seeing her, worried after seeing Orphea knock her out of the cage. "Are you okay, Alice?" she asked, checking her for signs of injury. Alice hugged Weiss back, smiling. I'm fine, stop embarrassing me," she laughed. "This is Orphea," she said, turning and introducing the purple-eyed girl. Weiss narrowed her eyes at Orphea, then stuck out her hand. "I'm Weiss," she stated. "I still don't like how you hurt her, but I'm glad you two enjoyed yourselves." Nice to meet you, Orphea said, taking her hand and shaking it. Aaron also introduced himself as Alice's trainer, discussing martial arts with Orphea for a while before the award ceremony began. The names of the top 3 were called up by weight class, with Alice's division going last. They were given medals and lean, bowing together as the crowd snapped photographs. After the award ceremony was over, Orphea excused herself, needing to go home and tell her parents the good news. They traded contact information before leaving, promising to see each other at the next tournament. So, how was it? Aaron asked as they walked back to the hotel. Surprisingly enjoyable, Alice said, grinning. And I made a new friend. Glad you liked it, Aaron said. Once we get back home, we need to start training for the upcoming tournament. There was a sound of running footsteps, and someone yelled, wait. Weiss spun around, reaching for Mertenaster before remembering that she had left it back at the hotel, unable to bring it into the gym because of security reasons. She breathed a sigh of relief as she saw a reporter running towards them, the cameraman struggling to keep up behind him. Do you think you could give us an interview? The reporter asked, out of breath. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw you, the miracle nurse, participating in this fighting tournament. Alice hesitated, about to refuse. Just a few statements, the reporter promised. I just want your feelings on the final match and your plans for the next tournament. Alright, Alice conceded, realizing that the fastest way to get him to leave was to answer his questions. The cameraman began to record as the reporter repeated the question and pointed the microphone towards her. It was a good fight, Alice said, and I learned a lot. As for my plans, well, I'm going to train hard and keep improving, and see where I go from there. The reporter nodded and spoke a few more words into the camera before motioning for the filming to stop. He thanked her for her time and they walked away, looking for more people to interview. The train ride home was uneventful, the 3 arriving safely. Aaron dropped the pair off at Alice's house, reminding her that training would begin again in 3 days. Alice groaned good-naturedly and Aaron laughed, driving off. Alice was beginning to feel sore, the last fight's bruises and injuries becoming more noticeable as her adrenaline and excitement began to fade. I need a hot bath, Alice groaned, plopping herself down on the couch. I'll set it up for you, Weiss said. Just take a nap or something. Alice smiled gratefully as Weiss rushed off to the bathroom, hearing the faucet beginning to run. She had dozed off when Weiss gently shook her awake, telling her that the bath was ready. Weiss helped her to the bathroom, where she began to strip off her clothes. She stared at her for a little, flushing when Alice caught her looking. Alice pulled off the rest of her clothes slowly and seductively, grinning when Weiss coughed and turned away, opening the door to leave. Come on, we can take a bath together, Alice whispered, sliding her arms around Weiss's chest and pressing her breasts against her. Weiss gulped and managed to blush even deeper, but she quickly took off her jacket and clothes, eager to join Alice. They slipped into the tub together, foregoing all pretense of bathing as they slid against each other, kissing and moaning, their skin slippery and warm as they made love. Water spilled out of the tub as Weiss made Alice pant and writhe, then Alice did the same to her, sounds of pleasure filling the bathroom. The two got out of the bathtub quite a while later, deliciously exhausted. They shared a large robe, caressing and kissing underneath it as they tumbled onto the couch, falling asleep in each other's arms. Chapter 35, The Tournament. Word spread around quickly at the hospital about her second place win at the amateur fighting tournament. The reporter had apparently been working for a large media network, and had been delighted to find more news about the miracle nurse that had been at the site of the terrorist attack. Oddly enough, people started talking to her more now, noticing her as a person and not just an object of interest. Although they were careful not to intrude on her personal space, Alice's co-workers were a lot more friendly, most of them beginning to overlook her faunus nature. Alice had to smile whenever someone joked with her, saying things like, "Whoa, don't punch me," in the middle of an argument and instantly diffusing the tension. Whenever her sensitive ears picked up snippets of conversation, hearing her fellow nurses saying things such as, "I'd totally let her kick my ass," she blushed and walked away, embarrassed yet also a little pleased on the inside that people finally seemed to be accepting her. Alice continued training her aura, but things had started to slow down, a few days of training only resulting in minuscule improvements. Keeping her garden in bloom was easy enough, but she still grew tired after healing a few major injuries, needing to rest for a while before her aura recovered. She agonized about this for a few days, wondering if this was the end to her fighting career, and wondering if this was the extent of her abilities. After wallowing in self-pity for a few days, she tried something different, this time instead trying to drain the plant, wondering if she could recover her aura if she flipped the process around. The plant wilted a tiny little bit, but Alice just felt even more tired, having spent more energy trying to harm the plant than she would have spent trying to heal it. Weiss noticed her depression and talked to her about it, Alice spilling out her fear that this was her limit, and that she'd never be as strong as Ruby or Weiss. "You're already plenty strong," Weiss said, stroking her hair and trying to comfort her. "Don't lie to me," Alice cried, her voice a little muffled as she buried her head in Weiss's chest. "I was there when I saw the four of you fight Ruby. I saw you set up that gigantic barrier that Ruby couldn't even break through. And Ruby was able to take down all of those androids, but you three still defeated her. Not everything is about aura," Weiss soothed. "And Ruby had a scythe gun, while you're just fighting by hand. Your glyphs are made with aura and you told me Yang can create fire and Blake leaves behind mirages," Alice said grumpily, sitting back and wiping off her tears. "And I've seen you move before, you're faster than me too." "You've only been training for a few months," Weiss cautioned. "Don't expect too much out of yourself. We've been training since childhood, and I've been put through so many tests." She trailed off, absent-mindedly rubbing her scar. Alice sighed, leaning into Weiss. "You're right," she admitted. "I'm being too arrogant. I can't expect to catch up to you in such a short amount of time, and I'm being insensitive by not respecting your past." "Sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for," Weiss said. "I understand your frustration. And think, your instant healing is a huge advantage in fights, and you're improving by leaps and bounds in hand-to-hand combat. If you master those techniques, it won't matter how much aura they have if you can outmaneuver them and take them down." Alice nodded, feeling a little better. "I still think you're downplaying the usefulness of aura, but I guess I can concentrate on my physical strength and speed instead." So Alice continued her physical training with Aaron, alternating between strength training and getting fighting experience by sparring with the other people at the gym. She even managed to push Aaron far enough that he was forced to bring out his aura, a burnt orange glare surrounding him as he fended off her attacks. In a huge burst of speed, he swept her legs out from under her and pinned her to the ground. "Ha! I got you!" Alice crowed triumphantly as Aaron rolled off of her. "What are you talking about?" Aaron said indignantly, brushing himself off. Alice grinned. "I made you use your aura." Aaron laughed. "I guess you did," he admitted. "Your progress is astounding, Alice. At this rate, I think you'll surpass me soon enough." She just shook her head, knowing on the inside that her progress would be much slower now that her aura had stopped increasing. The months passed and the professional tournament soon came up. Alice was feeling excited, hoping to meet Orphea again and possibly have a rematch. The tournament was taking place in the upper-class district, a large amount of paid spectators coming to the event. This time they took an airship there, the distance making travel by train impractical. It was Alice's first time being on an airship, and she stared wide-eyed the whole time, the gigantic vehicle with its spacious interior and large windows astounding her. Even Weiss was affected by her enthusiasm, even though she had taken countless airship and hoverjet rides as part of her duties of being the Schnee Dust Company heir. The venue was huge, swarming with watchers and contestants. Luckily, Aaron had the foresight to book a hotel room immediately after Alice had been entered into this tournament, the rest of the available rooms in all the hotels near the venue having quickly filled up afterwards. The setup of the arena was similar to the previous tournament Alice had gone to, but on a much larger scale. Cages made out of distinctive steel silk mesh were scattered throughout a pavilion, the cages nearly twice as large as the previous ones Alice had fought in. Each cage was on a raised platform, overhead lights shining down on them to illuminate the fighters if needed. The pavilion contained cafes, each serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner, with booths set up for advertising companies or other activities. Overall, it seemed more like a giant festival than just a fighting tournament. The tournament was a 4-day event, with over 100 participants for each weight division. A collection of skilled fighters gathered from various areas in Vale were to compete, and Alice felt excited just to be included in that number. They had arrived a day earlier than the event to give themselves a chance to get used to the outdoor conditions, and Alice saw a lot of potential contestants also walking around the city, Erin pointing out a few notable ones to her. The city seemed to have also been caught up in the event, banners advertising the tournament hung up everywhere and the city filled with tourists. The three went back to the hotel room a bit earlier to get some rest before the next day. The hotel room was huge, nearly the size of an apartment, with a majestic poster bed and large bathroom that had a phenomenal marble bathtub. Alice and Weiss had some fun in there, relieving a bit of stress before the big event. After that, Alice spent a little while talking with Weiss about her future, wondering if she would continue fighting or eventually become a doctor. Weiss fell asleep before Alice did, with Alice staying up a little while longer to nervously search up her possible opponents in her tablet. She spent some time checking out her matchup for the next day before forcing herself to put down the tablet and close her eyes. The next morning she woke up completely awake, her nerves tingling as she sat upright, her mind racing as she realized that the tournament was today. She sat in bed for a while before Erin knocked on their door, telling them to wake up. Shaking Weiss awake, she made sure her pajamas were covering her before going to the door and opening it. Erin held out a pair of shorts and a tank top to her. "What is this?" Alice asked, taking the clothing from his hand and examining it. "These clothes finally arrived," Erin said. "I was afraid wouldn't get to your house on time, so I had them rerouted and sent here. Remember when I told you I'd take care of those sponsor offers? These are the regulation clothes for the tournament and they also display the logos of the companies that are sponsoring you." "Sponsoring?" Alice asked. "Since when? You didn't think I'd pay for a first-class airship ride in a 5-star hotel room out of my own pocket, did you?" Erin responded, chuckling. "I barely make ends meet as is. Some of the money we get from our sponsors goes to paying for our equipment, some of it is invested, and of course, I'm saving up a bit for the school I plan on opening up. You can ask for your share at any time, it's in a separate account." "That's actually pretty cool," Alice said, eyeing the black clothing that was emblazoned with colorful brand names. Erin looked relieved, glad to have made the right decision. "And another thing," he added. "Change into your clothing right now, then put on a jacket and some track pants. The locker rooms will probably be crowded, considering the number of contestants, so you can change now to avoid the hassle." Alice nodded and began to close the door when she realized what Erin was wearing. "Wait, do your shorts also have sponsors on them?" "Of course," Erin said. "I'm also going to participate in this tournament. This is a great opportunity to demonstrate my ability and perhaps even win something." Alice stared. "You didn't tell me." Erin looked sheepish. "I guess it slipped my mind," he said, "and I thought it was pretty obvious. This is the biggest tournament of the year, so I definitely wasn't going to miss it." "Well, I hope I don't go against you," Alice said, feeling even more nervous now. "I'm 2 weight divisions higher than you, so no, you won't." "Will my opponents be as good as you?" Probably not," Erin said truthfully. "I think you'll get pretty far. You should change now, and then we'll eat some breakfast before we go." He shut the door and Alice began changing, Weiss yawning and stretching. "Hey look, Weiss," Alice said, pointing at the new apparel she was wearing. "Sponsors." Weiss looked impressed. "Some of those are pretty big companies," Weiss said, getting up and closely looking over each logo. Weiss's face got a little close to her chest, so Alice arched her back a little more, raising an eyebrow. "You like what you see?" Alice teased, stroking her hands over her firm body. Weiss realized what position she was in and blushed, quickly standing up. "Come on," she said, cheeks pink, "no more messing around. Let's get changed and eat some food so we're not late to your way in." Erin told Weiss over breakfast that he was also participating, and she took it in a stride, finding it quite logical. The 5-star hotel's food was delicious, Alice able to order a custom-made omelet that the chef prepared on the spot. "This is probably not the right time to ask, but isn't it a bit weird that you're eating animal eggs?" Weiss wondered. Alice grinned, shaking her head. "In terms of physiology, Faunas are basically humans with a few added benefits and some other animal traits, she said, pointing to her ears and Aaron's horns. And besides, eggs are rich in nutrition and an easy source of food, so plenty of animals eat the eggs of other animals. They finished breakfast quickly and walked to the tournament grounds, which were quite close to the hotel. Aaron and Alice immediately set off for the changing rooms and the weigh-in areas, Weiss deciding to walk around a bit and look at the booths before the matches started. Alice still easily passed the weigh-in, despite having gained a few pounds of muscle, and then the two were directed to a waiting room. Aaron was called out to fight first. Alice only had one match for the day, having gotten a bye from the amateur tournament, so she sat in the waiting room for a while, watching matches on the video screen as she waited for her turn. Just as Alice saw the results of Aaron's fight in the screen, seeing that he had won the match, a judge came in and called her name. "You're up," he said, handing her a pair of padded fingerless gloves. Alice slipped them on and followed him out of the room. The crowd parted for the official and snapped photos of her as she walked to her cage, stretching a bit and loosening up her tense muscles. The large open steel silk cage rose up in front of her, the silvery mesh walls nearly twice as tall as her. A panel of 3 judges sat outside of the cage in their own roped-off section, there to help make the final decision in deciding the match. Her opponent was already inside and waiting. He was an ox faunus, only an inch or so taller than her but bulky and muscular, looking as though he had just barely slipped under the weight limit. Alice got into position opposite to him and the referee stepped forward and brought his hand up, signaling the beginning of the fight. They began to circle each other, looking for openings. Alice threw out a few fast jabs and leg strikes, testing the ox fauna's defense, but he just grunted and kept his guard up, watching her. With a bellow, he began to charge, but Alice had already predicted that and dropped low, flaring her aura and tackling his legs. His aura clashed with hers as she flipped him over and threw him to the ground, rotating and landing on top of his leg. The ox panicked as she began bending his leg back, kicking out with his other leg and trying to push himself up. Alice held on, ignoring the frantic kicks to her head, but the oxen suddenly shouted and lifted his leg straight up, also lifting Alice into the air, and swung his leg around, smashing her against the cage. The force of being slammed against the tough steel silk made her loosen her grip, the oxen then stomping her against the ground and quickly backing away. Alice got to her feet and shook her head, a little dazed. The ox took advantage of her disorientation and took the offensive this time, dashing forward and swinging at her. Each punch was strong but a little slow, so Alice dodged a few fists before grabbing hold of one and twisting it to the side, then pushing it back against the ox and bending his wrist joint to the limit. The ox grunted and backed off, trying to loosen her hold, but Alice followed him, eventually backing him up against the cage and pressing even harder, forcing him to his knees. Alice was a little afraid that she might have to completely snap his wrist before he gave up, but the ox yielded before she had to do anything drastic, tapping the mat as Alice forced him down to the ground, his wrist bending further than it should have. The referee rushed in and Alice immediately let go, wondering if the ox was okay. He held his arm, face pinched in pain, and Alice felt bad, wondering if the injury was severe. The ox was walking out of the ring when Alice ran up to him. "Wait," she said. The ox turned around, a questioning expression on his blunt face. "Can I heal you?" Alice asked, motioning with her hands. A spark of recognition took hold in his eyes and he nodded, holding out his wrist. Gently wrapping her fingers around his injury, she shifted his fracture back into place and knitted the bones back together, also stemming a bit of internal bleeding. "Thanks," he said gruffly, smiling at her. "Good match." Alice nodded and shook his hand, agreeing. They walked out of the ring separately, Alice heading towards Weiss, who was standing in the crowd and smiling at her. A girl suddenly ran in front of Alice, holding a small tablet up and taking a selfie with Alice in the background. Giving her a shy wave, she disappeared back into the throng, leaving Alice a little bewildered. "Did you see that?" Alice asked Weiss, taking her jacket and track pants from Weiss's arms and slipping them on. "Yeah, you're definitely getting popular," Weiss said, grinning. "Where do you think Aaron is?" "We can go check the standings," Alice said, beginning to walk towards one of the large electronic signs. After waiting a bit for Aaron's name to pop it, they saw that he had just won his second match, winning by a knockout. They headed toward the cage where he had just had his match, meeting him halfway there. Aaron looked refreshed, smiling, showing no visible signs of injury. Easy match? Alice asked. He shrugged. The other guy was slower than me, so I just closed the distance and knocked him silly. Did you really just say, knocked him silly? Alice teased. I think you're just faster than everyone else, Weiss observed. All this fighting has made me hungry, Aaron declared, ignoring them. Let's go get some lunch, and then we can spend the afternoon watching the rest of the matches. They walked to the edges of the pavilion, buying some sandwiches and fried potatoes, and sat down at a bench to eat lunch. Afterwards, they spectated the other rounds, Alice noting how the heavier divisions fought. With each weight increase between the classes, the fighters got larger, their muscles and auras seeming stronger and more solid than the lighter divisions. That's just an illusion, Aaron said, shaking his head after Alice had pointed them out. If you haven't realized already, the weight divisions are meaningless. Weiss nodded. Aura is the real determinant here, isn't it? Yup, Aaron said. Considering the amount of strength and speed aura-enhanced fighters have, that extra bit of weight or power doesn't really matter in the overall scheme of things. Then why are we fighting at lower-weighted divisions? Alice asked. 2 reasons. One is because this is our natural weight, and it wouldn't be good to starve or gorge ourselves to higher or lower weight divisions. 2 is because a lot of the spectators, including audience these fights are being broadcasted to, normal, people. Those who can wield aura on a significant level are relatively rare, so the audience needs a bit of normality so that they can relate to the fighters and actually have interest in our fighting. Thus, the weight divisions distract the audience from the fact that our auras are what gives us our strength. Alice and Weiss stared, surprised at the length and depth of the explanation that Aaron just gave. Wow, Alice said. That sounds awfully. She trailed off. It's not a good system, Aaron agreed, but the company that runs this tournament needs to earn money to recoup their losses from creating the venue and also to pay out the prizes. In addition, this gives you and me an opportunity to advertise our sponsors to a large amount of people and earn a bit of our own money. So is there anywhere fighters can compete without weight divisions? Weiss asked. Of course there are. But those matches are usually much less popular and less advertised. It's disillusioning for the audience to see a skinny little girl throw around a full-grown man. Alice looked down at herself. Times are changing, Aaron said, nodding. The growing popularity of huntresses and hunters are enlightening more and more of the population about the existence and use of aura. That's why you'll see people like Orphea gather huge fan bases, where people will idolize her based upon her looks combined with her seemingly impossible strength. You're very talkative today, Weiss noted, looking at Aaron in a new light. I think I like this intellectual side of you. Aaron smiled, his cheeks tinting in pleasure. I need to know these things because I'm going to be creating my own fighting school, remember? Now that you've mentioned her, how's Orphea doing? Alice wondered. I haven't watched any of her matches today. The lighter weight divisions have their fights in the morning, Aaron said, so you wouldn't have had the chance to spectate her. However, I did see that she won her match today. I'm sure we'll bump into her if we keep walking around. Unfortunately, they didn't meet Orphea, but they did watch a few more matches for a while before heading back into town for a meal and a rest. They each had matches tomorrow morning, so Aaron wanted them to make sure they slept well and were refreshed before fighting. The 3 headed back to the hotel rooms after dinner, and Aaron wished them a good night before going to his own room. It was night time, and Alice and Weiss were snuggling in bed, blissful. Weiss was just about to doze off when Alice spoke up. Weiss. She mumbled sleepily. I think I need a weapon. I see. No, really, Weiss. Weapons make you so much stronger. Go grow a weapon or something, Weiss muttered, half asleep. Alice thought for a moment. But wood rots, and isn't as hard as metal. Power it with your aura, Weiss responded, snuggling deeper. But then it'll just break when I don't put aura into it. I don't know, Weiss mumbled. Find something that fits who you are. Alice nodded, contemplating her words. Sorry for bothering you, she said, realizing that she was preventing Weiss from sleeping. That's okay, Weiss said, and promptly fell asleep. Alice sighed, listening to Weiss's peaceful breathing. Once her hand-to-hand combat skills stopped improving quickly, she'd have to find something else, something that would continue to allow her to grow stronger. Chapter 36, The Tournament PT2. They were beating each other with their fists, sweat flying through the air, all semblance of technique or grace dropped as Alice desperately tried to break down her opponent's aura. Both of them were extremely tired, their legs like leaden weights and their arms slowly moving through the air. Her opponent was a human this time, small but strong with decent aura reserves, a blue glow surrounding him. Alice's aura was the first to run out, flickering and then fading as a well-placed punch caught her in the side. But Alice didn't stop, instead pulling on the last reserves of her physical strength and using her natural faunus ability to drop to a crouch and sweep out a leg, catching the tired human by surprise and sending him dropping to the floor and landing on his back with a grunt. He tried to scramble up but Alice was already right beside him, kicking him in the ribs. He tried to stand back up again and again, but Alice just rolled him across the floor, kicking him with all of her remaining strength and following his tumbling body. She didn't need her aura for her faunus strength enough, so she took this time to rest her upper body. With a final kick, his aura fizzled out, the human even more tired now that his source of energy had disappeared. Her arms rested, Alice flipped him over with her foot and cupped both of her hands together, bringing them down like a hammer into the side of his head. The crowd gasped as the human instantly stopped flopping around, his body going limp as the referee pulled Alice away and declared her the victor. Alice was pretty sure she didn't hit him hard enough to kill him, but she stayed anyways, offering her help as the attending physician checked over the human. The physician shook his head and gave her a thumbs-up sign, gently pulling the swaying human to his feet and leading him out of the cage. Alice sighed with relief and also walked out, heading for Aaron and Weiss, who were standing in the audience. She was a little unsteady on her feet, the match too close for her liking. Her lack of aura was really starting to become a problem. Dramatic and brutal, Aaron noted as Alice walked towards him. A sure crowd pleaser. Alice blushed a little. Are you happy with me or angry at me? No, that was good, Aaron said. I saw how you held yourself back in the last attack to make sure he wasn't permanently injured. You probably shouldn't do that for your next few matches, but it's all situational. How do you feel? Weiss asked. Are you going to recover in time for your afternoon match? I think I need some food and a nap, Alice responded. And then I'll be ready. Aaron agreed, so they navigated the crowds and began walking back to the hotel room. It was nearly noon, the sun high overhead. The number of contestants had decreased dramatically, with 3/4 of the contestants having been knocked out of the tournament by now. Thus, the number of cages had also been reduced and chairs had been set up, allowing the audience to spectate each individual match. Alice and Aaron had to stay in the waiting area until it was time for their fight, so they missed Orphea's match, but Weiss had been able to watch it. How did she look? Alice asked as they were walking. Pretty strong, Weiss admitted. Every time she hit her opponent she did some sort of shout and they just flew back. She threw them around until she found an opening, then held them down and knocked them unconscious. Alice immediately thought back to what Orphea had shown her, wondering if she was allowed to tell anyone. Do you think it was her semblance? Alice asked cautiously. Probably, Aaron chimed in. The only semblances that aren't allowed are the obvious ones, like materialization and projected force fields. The referees will immediately disqualify you if they see you use something that stands out too much. It's a natural extension of the "don't scare the normal people" rule. So if she had some sort of semblance related to her voice, and she disguised it by combining it with her attacks. Weiss muttered. Then it would be perfectly legal, Aaron finished. As long as you don't scare the audience too much, anything goes. Guys. I don't have anything like that, Alice worried. And the people progressing all seem to have some sort of semblance that helps them. Like Aaron's speed, Weiss nodded, agreeing. Aaron shook his head. You have healing. It's not easily noticeable, so the referees won't call you out on it, and your opponents won't know how to deal with it. I don't think there's ever been a competitor with healing before. Wait, so her strategy is to get seriously injured? Weiss asked, frowning. Well, as you've seen from the videos I've given you, the fighters who progress further in the tournament are more willing to take injuries and continue fighting, Aaron began. So for example, if you put someone in a wrist lock like you did earlier, the more dedicated fighters will just perform a counter maneuver and trade their broken wrist for an opportunity to injure you. But I'm not even sure if I can do the counters properly. You don't need to, Aaron explained. Because you can heal, you have multiple tries if your opponent tries to put you into a hold. All you have to do is break a few bones or dislocate a joint or two and you'll have a great opportunity to surprise them. Weiss looked unimpressed. So you just expect her to ignore the pain. You do realize that broken knees and dislocated sockets actually hurt a lot, right? It's very hard to make the conscious decision to severely injure yourself. Aaron was finally stumped. Well, adrenaline, I guess. It's fine, Ali said. I'll just save it as a trump card or something. As long as I have aura and I'm not passed out from the pain, I can keep on fighting. Weiss had the sudden mental image of Ali's lying broken and crumpled on the ground. She shuddered, wondering if it was an omen. I know how important this is to you, but don't take it too far, alright? Weiss warned. I'll be careful, Ali's promised. They arrived at the hotel, ordering room service at the front desk before heading upstairs. Aaron reminded them to set an alarm for 2 o'clock so they could get up 2 hours before the match and prepare, then headed back to his room across the hall. Alice didn't bother to change, too sore and hungry from her last fight to really do anything, and sat with Weiss on the couch, leaning on her. They were silent for a while, enjoying each other's company, before Alice began talking. So about my weapon. Not again, Weiss groaned. I think I've already told you that you should just find something that fits yourself. But I want to start training early, Alice explained. The limited amount of aura that I have almost made me lose today. If I had a weapon. Alice, why are you trying so hard to force yourself to find a weapon? Weiss asked. You don't immediately choose the right one, sometimes it takes a while before you find the one you like. That's the problem, Alice said. I don't think I can imagine myself wielding anything. And then I see you with that dust rapier, people with unfolding weapons, weapons with guns, weapons with explosives, and I realize that I can't really compete in actual combat with you guys. Then don't, Weiss said gently, trying not to sound insensitive. You can protect us by healing our fatal injuries, mending wounds that can't be fixed no matter how physically strong you are. Alice let out a frustrated breath. Then what was point of all this? Why did I train so hard if I can't even use anything I've learned? Weiss stroked her ears, embracing her. I think you're overreacting a little. You can still easily beat the average goon, and you still have enormous strength relative to the average faunus or human. And remember, even combat medics still have to learn how to fight. Alice shivered in ecstasy, the gentle strokes in her sensitive ears making her breathe a little faster and lose track of her thoughts. That's not fair, Alice whispered, struggling against her arousal yet also huddling closer to Weiss. Okay, I'll think about it, she acquiesced. Good, Weiss said, smiling and giving her a kiss. I can't bear to see you like that. The couch was messy when the room service came, the doorbell ringing. I'll get it, Weiss murmured, getting off of the flushed and panting Alice. Weiss straightened out her rumpled clothing, tying her hair back into place, and opened the door. A waiter stood there with a card, a little awkward, Weiss's frantic tidying up doing little to hide what she had been preoccupied with. I'll take it, Weiss quickly said, not giving the waiter a chance to speak before dragging the card inside, nodding to him and shutting the door. An hour passed before the two finally got around to eating lunch, the food a little cold but neither of them caring. Aaron gave Alice another set of sponsor clothing, Alice taking a quick shower and changing into them. The afternoon sun was still above the horizon as the two headed towards waiting area. They were stopped by a reporter for the event who just wanted a quick comment from them. You're in the top 16, Allison, he said. How does it feel to be one of the best flyweight fighters in Vail? It feels great, Alice said, giving him a nervous grin. It feels as though all of my training is paying off. He turned to Aaron, asking him a similar question. Aaron took the opportunity to advertise his upcoming tutoring services and fighting school, spewing out his contact numbers and giving his sponsors a shout-out before the reporter could take the microphone away. Hey, what about me? Alice asked as they left the reporter behind. Aren't you teaching me right now? You've already learned nearly everything that I can teach you, Aaron said, smiling. You're an exceptionally quick learner. If you want to keep progressing, you're going to have to find someone else who can teach you something different. Ah, Alice said, a little disappointed. Can I still spar with you? Of course, Aaron said. I'll actually have a lot more spare time once I get teaching offers because I'll be able to quit my daytime job. The two of them kept talking for a while, discussing strategy, before Alice was called out for her match. Aaron had few last words of advice before Alice left. Remember, no mercy, don't hold back, and don't be too hard on yourself if you can't win. You're already in the top 16, you're strong. Taking his advice to heart, Alice thanked him and left the waiting room, walking toward the huge cage in the center of the pavilion. A pathway led straight to the cage, cutting through the rows of chairs the audience sat on. Ignoring the camera flashes and cheers, she walked into the cage, taking deep breaths and analyzing her opponent. The Wolverine Faunus was short and stocky, his eyes murky green and a trimmed beard lining his jaw. He had a buzz cut that managed to add to his savage appearance, his incisors gleaming as he smiled at her. Surprisingly, he stepped forward, holding out a hand. I'm not going to hold back, he grinned. You ready? Alice nodded. Of course, she said, shaking his hand. Then let's not disappoint our audience. They stepped back, the referee standing between them and waiting for the announcer to finish giving their introductions. When the bell rung, he raised his hand and stepped back, signaling the beginning of the match. Alice weaved to the side even as the Wolverine dashed to her, barely dodging his outstretched hands. Grabbing his elbows as his arms flew past her, she continued his motion and threw him forward, slamming him into the steel silk cage behind her. He growled and ripped his arms from her grip, twisting his torso instantly and pushing off of the wall. He landed on top of her, hands clawing at her face, but she just flared her aura and held him up, keeping his hands away from her, his primal green aura flaring as he stopped her from crushing his stomach. Alice then bent backwards, throwing him off and slamming his head into the ground. The Wolverine recovered quickly, doing a handstand and moving himself away, his neck bent at an awkward angle. The referee began to signal to the end of the match, but the Wolverine smiled and yanked his neck back into place, a loud pop indicating his realigned vertebrae. Looking faintly disgusted, the referee allowed the match to continue. Once again he ran at Alice, and Alice backed off a bit, keeping her guard up. He took a step and jumped forward, doing what looked like a frontal kick, but instead pushing off of the side of the cage and leaping high into the air, coming down on top of Alice with an axe kick. Alice was confused for a moment, wondering where the Wolverine had gone, then looked up, immediately raising her arms into the air. The kick slammed down with frightening force, leaving a bruise despite the aura Alice was wielding. However, the Wolverine was in a compromising position, suspended in the air with a heel on top of Alice's forearms, so Alice was able to grab his ankle on the way down and twist it to the side. The Wolverine Faunus bounced up from the floor with his other leg, hopping a bit, then landed a kick on Alice's unprotected midsection. She gave a grunt and flew to the side, her body impacting the cage. The Wolverine gracefully landed and pounced again, and Alice once again raised her block. This time, however, he just grabbed one of her arms, sweeping a leg under her and sending her to the ground, bending her arm behind her back. Submit, he growled, Alice feeling her bones begin to splinter. Alice shook her head and got up on one knee, then rotated, screaming in pain as her upper arm and shoulder fractured. The crowd cheered, amazed that she managed to break the hold and unaware of the extent of the injuries. The Wolverine cursed, stepping back, and Alice used her momentum and a surge of adrenaline to slam an elbow into his jaw, feeling something break and making the Wolverine stumble backwards, dropping to a crouch. Gritting her teeth, she began to heal her arm, straightening it back into place and setting the bone, using her aura to reinforce it. The Wolverine's jaw was beginning to swell as he leapt towards her again, Alice raising her good arm to fend him off. They weaved and bobbed, trading glancing blows as they jabbed and kicked at each other. And then the Wolverine began to actually claw, his next few blows gouging into Alice's upraised arms and splattering blood across the floor. His swipes were so fast that they were taking off skin and tissue, each attack ripping deeper. She frantically tried to heal the damage, focusing on stopping the blood flow, her aura flaring as she tried to find off his aura-infused attacks. There was a lull in his mauling and Alice took the chance, lowering her own guard and slamming a palm forward. The strike hit the Wolverine's nose, breaking it, but he merely hissed and stabbed his fingers forward again, sinking them into Alice's sides. Alice could only scream as she slammed her elbows into his temple, dazing him, but he stubbornly held onto her ribs, his hands embedded in her flesh between the spaces of the bone. Grabbing his head, Alice pushed his face down and brought a knee up, slamming his mouth closed and further cracking his jaw in multiple places. She did this repeatedly, the Wolverine's grip growing weaker as she repeatedly broke his jaw, his eyes losing focus as he grew concussed. With a sudden roar and a desperate burst of strength, the Wolverine's grip tightened and her ribs snapped, the bones shattering in his fists, the sharp edges slicing into his palm. Alice's throat clenched, the sharp, crushing, searing pain nearly unbearable as her vision went fuzzy, her body going into full panic mode. She felt as though she was on fire, the pain signals radiating outwards from her broken ribs. Writhing and choking in agony, she spasmed and kicked him back, pieces of her ribcage being ripped out of her body as he skidded across the bloody ground. Seriously. Alice wheezed, her internal organs visible from the gaping holes in her abdominal cavity where her ribs used to be. The referee was at first confused, unsure about where all the blood was coming from, then threw up in the corner of the cage when he saw Alice, frantically signaling to end the match. The audience took a few more seconds to realize what had just happened, a few of them also retching, some of them cheering at the carnage, and most of them shouting or screaming at the shocked judges to get Alice's medical attention. The Wolverine tried to stand up a few times but failed to, his head trauma too great. He then noticed the bone shards in his hand, looking at the bleeding Alice and saying, "You win," before his eyes rolled up and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Her aura already severely depleted, Alice nevertheless tried to tide the flow of blood, managing to slow the pulsing spurts to a gentle ooze. She lay back down on the ground, calming her breathing and trying to slow down her heartbeat. A stretcher was brought to her, hands gently lifting her up and a light being shined into her eyes. She felt herself being moved out of the cage, down the stairs, past the roaring crowd, and into the back of an ambulance. Alice blinked, focusing the emergency medical technician standing above her. 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th ribs have nearly been completely removed, Alice gasped, trying to help them speed the process along. Partially collapsed right lung. They nodded, a bit surprised, and began taking the air out of her chest cavity, trying to reinflate her lung. Alice was beginning to sink into blissful unawareness when she heard Weiss's voice, demanding to be led onto the ambulance. "Relative," Alice croaked. A few seconds later, Weiss stepped into the back, standing in a corner and wringing her hands, clearly wanting to touch Alice but knowing to let the medical technicians do their jobs. Alice turned her head to the side, looking at Weiss and smiling deliriously. "I'll be fine," she mumbled. "Just out of aura for now." "Sorry, Aaron couldn't come, they only let one come on board," Weiss chattered, a little frenzied. "Stay with me, Alice, stay with me, this can't be happening again." Alice saw Weiss's panic and made a greater effort, pulling on her aura as hard as she could. One of the nearby technicians wobbled a little, his hand clutching his chest. Alice felt a tiny bit of aura enter her and she used it immediately. Her lungs were already mostly inflated, and they were beginning to stem the rest of her bleeding, so Alice finished up the job, forcing her blood vessels and the layer of skin to pull itself back together, the technicians shouting in surprise as her skin healed back up. Some of them tried to push her back down, but Alice just shook her head, sitting up. "I'm fine now, see?" Alice panted, now completely exhausted. Ignoring the people around Alice, Weiss embraced her, clutching her tightly, ignoring the red smears that ruined her pristine outfit. "Ow, ow, ow," Alice complained. "I'm still missing ribs." "There's so much blood on you," Weiss said, tears running down her face. "I thought I had lost you again." "Don't worry," Alice whispered. "I won't die again. I have this handy-dandy healing now, remember?" Weiss just laughed and sobbed, holding her the entire time as they were transported to the hospital. Alice stayed in observation for a few days, Weiss staying with her the whole time, the doctors checking on her condition. Each day Alice grew back parts of her ribs, waiting for her aura to recover, then forcing her body to calcify mineral deposits in the right places. The competition had continued on without her, one of the contestants getting a bye as neither Alice nor the Wolverine were able to continue fighting. Orphea took second place in her division, losing to a rabbit faunus that she just couldn't hit. Aaron ended up winning his division, getting the sponsors and offers that he wanted. He visited Alice right afterwards, ecstatic and incredibly happy. "I got enough money to buy a gym," Aaron said happily, bouncing. "Wow," Alice said, amazed. "Where is it?" "Really close to the old gym. I bought out the old warehouse across from the street and I'm going to completely renovate it." "So it's not a gym yet," Weiss observed. Aaron refused to let her bring him down. "It will be soon," he promised. "Construction starts tomorrow. I received plenty of investment offers right after my last fight was broadcasted." "Do you think it's wise to open up a gym right across the street from another gym?" Alice asked. "My gym will have bigger and better facilities, and I'll be teaching there. Our old gym was cramped and people had to bring their own equipment, so I'm going to offer them a new place to train," Aaron explained. "So, how are you doing now?" "Almost completely healed," Alice grinned. "The doctors won't let me out of here until I'm fully recovered." Aaron stopped twitching, his face taking on a serious expression. "Ah, what's going on?" Alice asked, a little nervous. "Do you still want to continue fighting?" Aaron asked cautiously. "After a traumatic fight, a lot of people retire." Alice nodded. "I definitely want to continue fighting," she declared. "I'm going to get better so I won't be injured like that next time." "Yeah, your fight was a bit ridiculous," Aaron agreed. "I don't think I've seen anything like that before. I bet the organizers are revising the rules now to ban Wolverines or something." "Are you sure, Alice?" Weiss asked. "I can teach you fencing if you want." "Like I said, I'm not going to stop training in hand-to-hand combat when I still have so much room to improve," Alice said, refusing to budge. Weiss sighed. "I regret giving you advice," she muttered to herself. Alice laughed, giving Weiss a hug. They talked for a little longer until Aaron excused Heimf, needing to go take care of a few phone calls and sort out his business arrangements. About an hour later, Weiss was talking with Alice about Beacon when a nurse suddenly came in, telling her that she had visitors. Alice nodded and the nurse left the room, a short man and a tall, slender woman walking inside. "Ah, hi," the Wolverine said. He looked embarrassed and nervous, his trimmed beard now clean-shaven, wearing neat dress pants and a dress shirt. The woman wore a silvery gown, long and slinky, and had tufted fox ears on top of her platinum hair, the long curls nearly to her waist. Her amber eyes narrowed as she slapped the Wolverine's back, making him wince and stumble forward. "Apologize, Thomas." "Sorry," Thomas said gruffly, looking downwards. "Didn't mean to hurt you so badly. I just got caught up in the fight and didn't want to let go." Alice smiled, nodding. "Apology accepted, but I don't think you needed one. A fight is a fight, after all." The fox prodded Thomas again, and he coughed and turned towards Weiss. "Sorry for hurting her," he said, a wary expression on his face as he waited for Weiss to yell at him. Weiss harumphed. "Apology also accepted," she said. "I understand that it was an intense match." The fox faunus smiled, relieved. "He doesn't look too sorry, but trust me, the first thing he did after waking up was ask if you were okay." "Kiera," Thomas whined, drawing out her name. "You said you wouldn't tell anyone." Kiera shushed him. "I'm Thomas's wife," she said, introducing herself. "I'm really sorry about this whole thing and I hope you're getting better. We have to go to a dinner party now, but give us your number and we'll pay for your medical bills." Weiss began to speak but Alice shushed her, realizing that Kiera needed to pay her back so she could forgive herself and her husband. "That would be great," Alice said, smiling. "And don't worry, I'm almost completely healed now." "Oh, good," Kiera beamed, visibly relaxing. The couple had to leave soon, so they swapped numbers and said their goodbyes before departing, the room once again silent. Alice. "Yeah. That was weird. Well-intentioned, but still weird." "Yeah.